Hey guys, well the British Grand Prix got off to an explosive start, didn't it? Even before a wheel was turned on the circuit with the news that Sergio Perez had tested positive for COVID-19. Of course we wish him the very best of luck in terms of his recovery, hope it's speedy. But very quickly after that, attention turned to finding a replacement. And then lots of you got in touch with me over the weekend asking questions centred around how on earth does a team go about fitting a new driver into a car like that at such short notice. So once the phone call was made to Hulkenburg, then it was about getting him into the UK, getting him to the factory, and there's a team within Racing Point, the travel department, that can take care of all of that. So immediately they'll have been on the phone sorting out flights, sorting out hotels, getting cars arranged to get him there, arranging a COVID-19 test, which he had to have done, arranging a super license, which is not the most straightforward process, and even arranging the contract that Nico will have had to sign. That contract has to then go to the contract recognition board and then get a super license off the back of having that contract signed. So loads of admin work that had to happen in the background, which is equally as important as getting the driver fitted in the car to enable him to race over the weekend. So getting him into the car, perhaps that's the bit I can shed some light on. Having done numerous F1 seat fittings over the years, let's talk about exactly what that process entailed. And to do that, I'm going to need a driver. I've got the seat, I'm going to need a driver. I haven't got Nico Hulkenburg, but I have got Ginger. Come on. Ginger. Or Nico Hulkenburg in this instance. The first thing that will have happened was they'll have brought Nico, of course, to the factory. By this point it was late at night. The night shift are in operation within that Racing Point factory, and the first thing they will do is get Nico into the car build area of the factory, where the team that do all the seat fittings will come together. They'll bring with them all the components they need, things like spare seats, all the pedal options that they have, various steering wheels, obviously any seats and belts arrangements that they have on boxes and shelves that are used for this kind of thing, to give the driver as many options to play with as possible. Then they get him sat into the mock-up chassis. Now, of course, we know that Nico's a very similar sort of height to Lance Stroll, and we know that because he was able to use Lance's overalls and boots, which we'll come on to in a moment. But that also means that that would have been the first seat that I've started with in terms of getting him into the car. Tried him in Lance's seat. In an ideal world, of course, that fits, things work out, and he's able to use that. Maybe they need to use a little bit of padding stuck around various areas around the shoulders to stop him moving left and right like that, because that's the last thing you want as you're going around a racetrack. So perhaps extra padding around either side will help in that instance. That padding can literally be made of cut pieces of memory foam or even two-part expanding foam just to fit him snugly into the seat. Now the other option, if he doesn't fit into that seat, if there's a problem with that, and don't forget there are various legality issues with getting a driver fitted into the car. You may have seen my in-depth seat fitting video, which I'll link up there in the corner and also in the description if you want to watch it afterwards. But the driver has to be sat in a point where the top of his crash helmet is lower than an imaginary line between the roll hoop at the top of the car and the rollover point on the front of the chassis. So there is a legality thing. He can't be sitting too high because then he would be illegal, he'd fail scrutineering. So these things all have to be taken into consideration. And gone are the days of being able to just race with a quickly mocked up two-part foam seat, because today, of course, that seat has to have FIA approved straps on the sides, on the back, around the legs, that the marshals, in the event of an accident, can strap the driver into the seat and lift him, still in the seat, and out and away from the car. Similarly, a neck brace board has to be able to be placed down a slot in the back of the seat. So there are some very serious legality issues that have to be addressed. If he didn't fit into Lance's seat, if it was just way too uncomfortable, perhaps then the solution is to make up a quick mock-up seat. And the way you do that is by sitting the driver on top of a giant black bin bag that sits inside the chassis, inside the seat frame or bucket seat. And then, once the driver's in, you would literally fill that up with two-part foam, expanding foam. Very similar to that you would fill a giant crack in your wall at home with. The driver sits in position with your hands on the steering wheel, sit in the driving position, that's it. Once you've got that position set, the foam starts to expand all around the driver. It actually goes everywhere. It's a horribly messy process. It expands everywhere, Eventually, of course, it goes hard, it sets, the driver can get out, and then you have an absolute accurate mould of the driver's body position. From that, you can take a template, you can take make a mould, make a pattern, and eventually, overnight, you can do this very quickly, you can actually make a bespoke seat. It may not be the perfect finished article, but you can make a bespoke seat pretty quickly for a driver. Then we have to move on to how else he fits in the car. The pedals next.
I can't reach the pedals.
Well, that's absolutely right. Your feet stink. Now, obviously on a Formula 1 setup, it's a 2-pedal setup, but there is some movement, just like on this, in getting the pedals closer or further away from the driver. Now, Ginger can't quite reach the pedals here. On this one, very easily, I can make an adjustment and slide the whole thing much closer where it works much better. On a Formula 1 car, you don't move the entire pedal box back and forward, but you do have some adjustment on a little push rod on the back of each pedal, which is just a threaded bar that can be screwed in or out to move that pedal further away from you or closer. There's also some adjustment on the amount of travel that you have. So for example, the amount of travel between being completely off throttle and being completely full throttle, that can also be adjusted too. Those are very quick, very simple, very easy mechanical adjustments that don't take a huge amount of time. The 2-pedal setup, of course, has 2 pedals which are flat plates that have a little lip on either side to stop your foot sliding off. Now, those are often made bespoke for each driver, but given that Nico was wearing Lance's race boots, we can assume that his foot was fine and fitted inside that little plate itself. So hopefully not too many issues in the pedal department. What about steering? Now, when it comes to steering, there is no adjustment on the steering column anymore. It's a solid carbon tube with all the electronics, of course, going down the centre of it. But there is still some movement. Now, if you think about, you sit back in your seat, stretch out to reach the wheel, your arms are nearly straight. It's much harder to turn a heavy steering wheel with your arms out straight. Much, much harder. Just physics determine that. So what you can do is bring the wheel closer to you. Now, in this instance, we need quite a lot, and I've got a fairly big adjustment down here that I can make, sliding the column up towards our driver here. Now, we can't do that in a Formula 1 car, but what we can do is we can make a little spacer to go right in here between where the steering wheel mounts to the boss that attaches to the steering column. Maybe just a 5mm spacer, maybe a 3mm spacer, but there'll be a selection of those that the team have in a box ready to be used if necessary, that will just give that tiny little bit of movement. That movement is important because not only does it keep the driver comfortable, and when the wheel's closer to you, you're able to use your entire shoulder muscles and arm muscles to turn the car much more easily. Just like that. But also, it's about getting clearance from your gloves, your hands, on the steering wheel, which runs very, very close to the edge of the chassis. There are little tiny cutouts in the head support, head surround, headrest material that have to match up relatively accurately with the steering wheel and your hands, so that when you're turning through the lock, you're not clipping your knuckles on the side of the chassis or the side of the headrest surround. So a little bit of movement in there, but we're talking about a few millimetres. But again, given that Nico was relatively similar in terms of stature to Lance Stroll, hopefully not too many issues. Then there is some stuff around leg padding. There's a tunnel of padding that goes all the way down the inside of the chassis. That should probably have been standard, exactly the same as what Lance would use. I wouldn't imagine there'd be too many issues there. The steering wheel height, there's a little bit of movement on the column up or down, again just using spacers. Again, that should have been relatively straightforward. So hopefully by choosing Nico, not only do they get a driver that's relatively familiar with the team, obviously very familiar with modern Formula 1, having, even though he's been out for a while, only missed 3 races before this weekend. They've also got a driver that, just by coincidence I think rather than choice, probably fits quite well into that Racing Point chassis, given they already have a very tall driver. And what a shame it was we never got to see him race over the course of Sunday. His biggest challenge, of course, will have been building up his neck muscles, something that the race on Sunday would have been absolutely crucial to helping him condition himself ahead of what will almost certainly be his second outing in a week's time at Silverstone again. Right, are you comfortable?
Yes.
Feeling good? Happy? Right, get on with it then.